Well, with me, I've got DEFRA Minister Clare Barber. We're talking about Dan Richardson. The interview I did with him the other day has got quite a lot of traction, and I wanted to balance this up. I think it was a backbencher. Were you pro him, or was it just Daphne? I know there was everyone seemed to be quite liking the guy, and he's certainly very credible, but he's sort of on somebody else's land, as it's turning out to be. I've heard rumours, in fact, that he might be evicted any moment now. In fact, I had a tip this morning, but so far I think he's still there. Now you're back your holidays, maybe you can bring us up to date on where we stand with this gentleman and what your position is.
Yeah, so the position obviously came into the department, and this was one of the things that had been carrying on for quite a long period of time, actually, I think it's fair to say. There'd obviously been a court ruling that had said that this was definitively DEFRA land, and therefore land for the enjoyment of everyone on the Isle of Man. I know there's been a lot of discussion about that process that went on in the courts. That's a public judgment. The ruling is available for people to read. So I took a lot of time, I think it's fair to say, reading through the reams of correspondence that had happened in relation to this case to try and really understand what the primary blockers were, what the issues were. My position has been throughout that I think that there's a benefit to sustainable off-grid living. It's something that I'd like us to look to support in the future. But then that still has to happen within the remit of planning permission, building consent.
He did win a Biosphere Award, though, didn't he? I mean,
well, I think
sort of, didn't he?
No,
no, okay. Did I read that wrong? From
all the reading I've done, I think he nominated himself for a Biosphere Award.
Okay.
I'm not aware that it was one, but I'm happy to be corrected if you've got a copy.
No, I may have put that
Biosphere
wrong because I looked him up and it said he had, but you know how you pick up information.
Yeah, certainly. I think I don't think anyone's denying that there are huge benefits to sustainable off-grid living, but that has to be done in a way where it's done through appropriate building regulations. The building regulations have been put in for safety reasons, and it's absolutely right that we're able to check any constructions to make sure that they conform and that no one's being put at undue risk, even if they're happy with that risk, because that's something I've seen talked about, that if someone's happy to live in a situation that is inherently risky, then we should let them carry on with that. But actually those things are put in for valid reasons, often because there have been incidents in the past where things have gone wrong. And I think it's absolutely right that we do put controls in to keep people living in safe environments that don't risk everyone else as well, ultimately.
Wales has this thing that's been passed years ago, that you can do this if you go through the paperwork properly. And is this something you see potentially we could make this more of a way forward?
So that's certainly something I spoke with Dan when I went up to see him, is that I do see something in the future where potentially there is an opportunity for sustainable off-grid living. I think that that's something that we should look at, but that needs to be done in an area that's been identified for use in that regard. Ultimately also because otherwise we have an issue around planning consents as well, so we need to look at changing our planning policy, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So I was very clear on that fact, and nothing's changed. I can't change policy overnight. It would be irresponsible, I think, to do so, to just quickly say, oh, actually, we're just ripping the rule book up and doing things differently. So from my perspective, it would need to be done in properly identified places with building regulations approval and with planning permission. But actually, it's not an impossible thing to do.
But historically, no one seemed to know who that land was. It's been a bit of a mess, hasn't it, from the word go, before deciding it was government land. And he's cleaned it up. He's made a big effort to look after the environment. Is there no way that you can work together, or is it principles more than anything here? Because if one person does it, you could have everyone wanting to do the same thing.
Yeah. So I mean, again, I talked at length with Dan, and I said, look, I'm not someone who's just going to come into office, read the papers, send you a letter. I wanted to go up and see him. That's not my style, and I think people who know me would hopefully appreciate that's not how I am. I wanted to go up and be able to look at him and explain the reasons why I didn't feel there was any way forward. So there's two sticking points, I think it's fair to say. One is around the permission, as you say. I have a concern if we set precedent by saying that's fine. I'm also aware this isn't the only case that we've had in the recent past where people have attempted to set up home on government land, so land available for public use. And so where do we draw the line, I suppose? At what point do we let lots of sustainable off-grid living become greenfield development? At what point do we say Archalagan plantation in the middle of there is not okay, but this piece of land is okay? And I don't know how we break that down without coming up with a proper policy about how this might look, and proper land that would be zoned and able to allow off-grid sustainable living, which I think, as I say, is a something I'm not against in and of itself. Then the second piece is the planning permission. So because this doesn't have planning permission, when you don't have planning permission for something, the notice, as it were, is served on the owner of the land. So that notice has been served on DEFRA as non-compliant in terms of planning. Now, I know Mr Richardson has talked about the fact that he's putting a planning application in.
It's going backwards, isn't it? One of those, after the event, he's asking
retrospective
for it now.
planning, yes. And he asked me the question, could he put planning application in? And I'm not going to lie to anyone. Of course, anyone can put planning application in.
Anyone can do anything.
I can put planning in to bulldoze your house
really?
And build a sustainable off-grid building here in your house.
You don't own the property, I think.
Doesn't mean I can actually do it. What it means is that complies with the planning policy. So something can comply with planning policy, but you might be like, hang on a minute, you haven't agreed to buy my house, I'm not willing for you to bulldoze it. And there may be other objections. So there's a whole host of other things that fit in around that. It's not so simple as saying, I've put planning permission in. I could put planning permission in to bulldoze the Villa Marina, equally. I could put planning permission in to extend my neighbour's house. They might not be particularly happy for me to do it. So planning permission is one piece of a jigsaw.
Was that just delaying the inevitable then?
No, I mean, from my perspective, that anyone is within their rights to submit a planning application, and that's the statement I made. Right. He's absolutely within his rights to submit a planning application, which will go through the process. Okay. It doesn't mean that it overrides the consent that's needed to use that piece of land, and ultimately that comes back to setting precedent.
Well, it appears on Friday, I think 4 o'clock, time ran out, and we were waiting to see what's going to happen. As I said at the beginning, I've heard that there's all sorts of rumours going around that you'll know. Is he about to evict him?
So I've advised my officers, just as I told Mr Richardson when I went up there, that I will be proceeding with an eviction if he doesn't choose to leave, which would be still my preference here, is that he would leave.
He doesn't want to go, you know that, obviously. It's going to be quite messy.
There's lots of things I don't want to do in life, but essentially I've had to make a policy decision, and for me the policy decision is that, and I've gone through council and ministers to ensure that I'm not on my own in believing that it's right, that we protect against unauthorised occupation on government land. That's essentially
so when's it happening? When's he going to be removed?
I've instructed the officers to proceed in that regard, so I'm just waiting for them to arrange that. That's the operational delivery element.
The bailiffs go in, the coroner, whatever, go in, remove him physically. It's going to make great TV pictures, this, you realise. Take him out, and then presumably lock it up, or bulldoze the cabin? No,
so I've been very clear, and I was very clear with Dan as well when I went there. I'm not looking to bulldoze the cabin. We've offered anyway to store the cabin, to dismantle it piece by piece, to make sure that everything in there is looked after and respected as I would with anyone's possessions. And that's absolutely the way this would be done. It would be taken down and we'll store it. For 3 months is what we've offered. I would be willing to extend that as well. I'm certainly not trying to be unreasonable in all this, but there has to be a point at which we draw a line under this. And having gone through all the options...
So this is just, he cannot stay, this is it. Because he was telling me about, after he did an interview, about the Banks Wildlife Trust wanting to use him. I don't know if you've been aware of that, and make him an official part of the whole process and look after these trees and the wildlife, because he has apparently done a great job clearing that area up. I think he's sort of saying DEFRA weren't interested in it, it was all overgrown and looking messy, and then of course now suddenly you are interested in it. But is there any way forward to work with him there, I suppose, on this? So,
not from my perspective, we're not given permission for this to happen in this way on this site. Yeah. I'm not saying that in the future we're not, because as I said before, I'm absolutely keen to look at sustainable off-grid living, but it has to be done in a structured way. Otherwise, what would be interesting is that actually I have been following on social media, and I think I'm up to about 23 people at the minute that I've come across who'd like to do similarly if we say this is fine. So I suppose my question to the public is, where do you want us to approve of all these people? Because there has to be a point we say, actually, there are rules in place, and we've adopted planning policy as our way to manage our occupation of land on our island, to protect it for the wider community. So if we're happy to just scrap all that and let people do whatever they want wherever they want, I mean, I'm sure there are people who'd love that, but I'm not convinced that's really what we want. When every time there's a greenfield site being proposed, people in fact say, hang on a minute, actually let's look at where we've already got houses and properties.
To finish with, what sort of duty of care have you got for Mr. Richardson? I mean, he gets removed, and that's now definitely going to, from your, you said exactly, he will be homeless. He hasn't got any plan B himself, I don't think, has he? I mean, do you have any guidance so you can help him find accommodation? Or, I mean, not you personally, but government people will help him?
So we have signposted him through agencies that would be able to provide options for him. Mm-hmm. That really is what I would do in a normal situation, and I certainly know that as in any case, I would encourage someone to contact their local councillors, their local MHKs, to support them if they find themselves in that situation. This is not for me about me going out seeking to make someone homeless. This is me saying that actually what I can't do is set a precedent that potentially could have ramifications for years to come for our island.
You came into this, you picked this story up, I suppose, this whole case. Could it have been handled differently or better in any ways, do you think, that with that bit of hindsight you get when you took it over?
I mean, I think the length of time, I think I would say, has been probably unhelpful. And I do understand that there is a frustration in that regard. Obviously, there was the court case, and then there has been the 5 months. It's actually the court have given longer than they needed to allow Mr. Richardson to vacate the land, which I think was done to try and make things easier for him. Obviously, at the minute, he's saying he's not going to take us up on having used that. The deadline has passed, Friday just gone, as you said. But I say I would still appeal to him. I would ask him to consider leaving amicably. That would be my preference, would be to leave. But ultimately, as I say, we're not going to drive a bulldozer through. That's not my way of working.
But just pushing you again, I mean, he's going sooner rather than later then?
I've asked the officers. They were instructed that once the deadline had passed, that we would proceed with having him removed from the land.